Welcome back to part 3, Inking. First, I adhere the paper to the printed sketch and use an LED tracing tablet to see the lines. However, even on the brightest setting I can barely see the printed lines through the thick watercolor paper, and many fine details almost completely disappear. In one way it's annoying, in another it forces me to automatically alter underlying lines, which helps bring more uniqueness to a previously partially traced drawing. Since I use watercolors to color my comic, I have to use watercolor paper as well. I'm using cold-pressed paper and we'll talk about this more in the next step, but here it is important to know that cold-pressed paper has a quite rough texture to it, which makes it exceptionally difficult to ink with a pen nib. That is why I unfortunately cannot use a G-pen, the preferred all-rounder nib for Japanese manga artists. Mine is an EF nib with a slightly rounded tip, making wider lines and thus gliding better across the rough paper without scratching it up the way a G-pen would. This also means that I can't really draw super fine lines though. For that I have to use micropens. The ink I use is Lineart No. 4, which is absolutely waterproof, a necessity when wanting to apply watercolors later on, and dries fairly quickly. I was surprised when I found out how many different types of ink there were. Some which were good with alcohol markers like Copics, some good for watercolor, some better for standard manga manuscript paper. The first time I ever tried using ink to draw manga with when I was younger was calligraphy ink from an art supply store along with a calligraphy pen. I just couldn't wrap my head around how people would draw manga with this. Note that this was before the advent of smartphones and YouTube tutorials for everything. Also, here's a note for using liners and micropens. There's a difference between waterproof and water-resistant ink. Water-resistant ink will withstand water to some degree, meaning the lines will remain legible after a few drops of water, but still fade when you apply a wet brush to them. Waterproof is impervious to water and what you'd want for a watercolor line art drawing. There's also so-called document or archival ink, which is a term used to mark the ink's quality in terms of longevity, basically meaning you can safely sign documents without your signature ever fading out. All archival ink is waterproof, but not all waterproof ink is also archival ink. This wraps up the inking section of this video series. See you in the next one.